May the 9th, 1940. A little French town with little French children. A town in the Ardennes, not far from Germany, which is at war with France. But things have been quiet. Until now. So the children continue to line their clogs up neatly, and their school teacher says, "Today we'll learn a nice song to bring peace back to us." Round, round, round go the puppets. This will be their last class. The 10th of May, 1940. At 5:35 a.m., the Germans unleash their offensive. German paratroopers are dropped into Holland. They are the vanguard, the first of 3 million invaders. The Wehrmacht marches into Belgium. This is Hitler's decoy. The Germans pretend they're going to attack France through neutral Belgium, as they did in 1914. The French General Gamelin, Commander-in-Chief of the Allied forces, is confident. He has everything covered. He fine-tuned his strategy during the phony war. Gamelin moves his best motorized divisions, the elite of the French army, into Belgium, along with the entire British Expeditionary Force. These are fighting soldiers with true grit. They will stop the German advance through Belgium. But Hitler, in his headquarters, is gloating. His decoy worked. He exclaims, "I could weep for joy." He instructs Field Marshal Goering, who commands the Air Force, not to bomb the French columns, to let them proceed deep into Belgian territory. And he attacks them from the rear. His real offensive will be through the Ardennes. According to the French High Command, no tank could ever get through those densely forested hills. But nothing stops them, except their own traffic jams. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands and Belgium, people who own cars are among the first to flee. Everyone is suspected. A so-called fifth column is feared, spies working for the Nazis. The Germans continue their diversionary tactics, invading Belgium with specially trained airborne forces. The sappers belt out their song from the campaign in Poland. The girls will have to wait, comrades. It's time to go, comrades. On the 11th of May, at daybreak, they are dropped into Belgium. Their goal is to capture the linchpin of the Belgian defense system, Fort Eben-Emael, on the Albert Canal, which is reputed to be impregnable. An intrepid German soldier heaves himself onto the top of a turret with a load of explosives. The conquerors stride through the ruins of Fort Eben-Emael, the key to Belgium. Images such as these will forge the Wehrmacht's reputation of invincibility. After the fort falls, people scramble to catch the last trains to Paris. In the French capital, the Red Cross is swamped. Belgian refugees are transferred to cattle cars heading south. As the Germans enter Liège, panic grows and spreads. Faced with such a show of force, there are only two options: obey or flee. Many of the refugees are people from the countryside. As in many times in history, farmers have always been the last to flee, loath to abandon their crops and their animals. The great Belgian poet Emile Verhaeren wrote, "The people around here have nothing at all, nothing before them, but the endlessness of the open road. The people who work the fields, the people around here, have only endless misfortune." The Germans unleash their aerial offensive, destroying strategic crossroads, airfields, refineries, and fuel supplies. Cities in northern and eastern France are bombed. The French are now facing the reality of modern warfare. In the Netherlands, the port of Rotterdam is ablaze, the result of a German terror bombing raid, like the one in Warsaw. But these bombs were dropped after the city had surrendered, another of Hitler's war crimes. In London, the new Prime Minister is Winston Churchill. His first speech reveals his determination to keep fighting, whatever the circumstances.
I will say, without a doubt, that the fate of Holland and Belgium, like that of Poland, Czechoslovakia and Austria, will be decided by the victory of the British Empire and the French Republic.
But things have suddenly turned very grim in France. In just 3 days, the Germans have swept through the Ardennes and are advancing towards the French defensive line on the Meuse River. They are closing the net with their pincer movement, seeking to entrap the Allied troops massed in Belgium. The German infantrymen knock over the French as if they came from a different world. With their hand grenades, machine guns, and with their sleeves rolled up, they take the town in 1 day. Sedan, the key to the Ardennes, which was already terribly marked by the French defeat in 1870. But the real obstacle for the Germans is the Meuse River. On the night of the 13th of May, they bring in beams to build bridges. The French fight back. But the Germans neutralized the French artillery, and the next morning their sappers finished the bridge, galvanized by their general, Guderian, a 52-year-old Prussian, a great armored warfare strategist, using tanks to strike with force, daring, and speed. The Blitzkrieg, or lightning war, should not give the enemy time to react. First, the tanks, followed by infantry, and backed by aircraft, especially the Stukas. The Stukas, dive bombers equipped with sirens. Resisting the intense pressure of the descent, their highly trained pilots released their bombs at the last minute with lethal precision. The French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud telephones Churchill in alarm. "We have been defeated. We have lost the battle." The French generals are at a loss. They are unable to react to the situation. With the Allied forces tied up in Belgium, how can they stop the Germans from advancing? In Paris, the French authorities are trying to deal with the increasing number of refugees. People from Belgium and northern France are pouring into the city. Schools, hospitals, and barracks are soon overflowing. Information is sparse, rumors abound. Has Gamelin committed suicide? No. The French High Command has just realized that the Germans are heading for the coast and that the Allies have fallen into a trap. A counterattack is ordered, allowing a certain Colonel de Gaulle to distinguish himself at the head of a tank brigade. The French army possesses more tanks, and they are of better quality than the German panzers. But without any reinforcements or aerial support, the French tanks become prey to the Stukas. The French combatants put up a good fight, but they wonder why the Air Force isn't protecting them. Poorly prepared and with fewer planes, the French pilots are heavily outnumbered by the Luftwaffe, but they fight courageously. Dozens of German pilots are shot down and taken prisoner. Some of these pilots will be returned to Germany when the armistice is signed and will then join the battle against Britain. The German tanks move swiftly through the towns and villages of northern France. Valiantly, the French try to slow the German advance. The Germans crush any pockets of resistance. The Germans have reached the English Channel. Hitler's strategy of the sickle cut has worked. The British Expeditionary Force, the Belgian Army, and the French Armed Forces are encircled. The Belgian king surrenders, along with his army. The British Expeditionary Force withdraws towards the coast, leading to the final collapse of the Allied armies. In Paris, the French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud dismisses Gamelin and finds a new savior, General Weygand, 72 years old, one of the artisans of the Allied victory in 1918. To bolster morale, Reynaud names another World War I hero as vice premier, 84-year-old Marshal Pétain, who will soon turn his back on Renault's policies. Weygand has no choice. He too is forced to order a full retreat towards Dunkirk. Hitler lets them go. A gesture of clemency towards Great Britain? Is he still hoping for a separate peace? Or has Goering assured him that his air force is capable of preventing an evacuation? 400,000 men cram the beach, helpless and in disarray. They have one last chance to escape, over the sea. Churchill orders any vessel that can float to go and get them. On the outskirts of Dunkirk, the French hold back the Germans, suffering heavy losses. Goering sends out the Luftwaffe's Stukas and bombers. "218,000 British and 120,000 French troops are successfully evacuated. The British Army is saved, but it's in tatters. The French will be sent back to France in a final attempt to defend their country. The British are sent off to re-equipment centres. All of Great Britain hails Dunkirk as an extraordinary feat. Churchill, however, puts it into perspective. With lucidity, he says, "Wars are not won by evacuation." Even so, in those first days of June 1940, the Dunkirk spirit is born. The ruthlessness of this war and the destructive power of the Nazi enemy are now apparent to the British. Lightheartedness and humour give way to frantic efforts to mobilise the nation. On the 4th of June, Churchill, who is also battling the defeatists on his own side, speaks out. His tone is unforgettable. "We shall fight on the beaches, on the landing grounds, in the fields, in the streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender." On the 4th of June, the Germans take Dunkirk. A fabulous bounty awaits them, lavishly filmed by the Wehrmacht's propaganda units. The British forces have left behind almost all of their equipment. The soldiers of the Wehrmacht film themselves in high spirits. They find a French gramophone with a famous record by Maurice Chevalier. The offensive continues. France collapses. But Renault and de Gaulle, who was Under-Secretary of State for Defense and War, want to continue fighting. In Rome, the Italian dictator Mussolini, Il Duce, has big news for his people.
La posizione di guerra è già stata consegnata agli ambasciatori di Gran Bretagna e di Francia.
Mussolini is hoping for his share of the spoils, the Rhone Valley, Marseille, as well as the disarmament of Corsica and Tunisia. The French say it's a stab in the back. Mussolini's offensive is cut short by the French Alpine divisions. General Rommel's troops storm Normandy and enter Rouen. Paris is declared an open city. In other words, it's turned over to the enemy without a fight, in order to be spared the fate of Warsaw or Rotterdam. The government has moved to Bordeaux. The Germans are approaching the city. Rumors fly. They kill, they rape, like the Prussians did in 1870. The Parisians, abandoned by their government, flee. All of France takes to the road, a cataclysm that will come to be known by a biblical name: the Exodus. Millions of French men and women head towards the Loire, the last rampart. But there is no rampart strong enough against the Stukas. On the 14th of June 1940, at daybreak, the Germans march into Paris. The Nazi emblem, the swastika, flies over Paris. One of the first acts of the German occupiers is to seize all the records of the abandoned ministries, lists of spies, of Jews, of Freemasons, and even the original copy of the Treaty of Versailles that so humiliated Germany in 1919. It is immediately sent off to Hitler. The exodus has come to a halt. The bridges over the Loire are blown. The only hope now is that the fighting stops. Pétain in Bordeaux also wants to put an end to things. The Germans continue their relentless advance southward. Though once considered a formidable force, the French army is now a shambles. And yet it has put up a better fight than was thought, especially at the time. In 1 month, 100,000 French soldiers die, more than in the same period of time during World War I, the deadliest of wars until then. $1,850,000 soldiers are taken prisoner, along with 36,000 officers and 176 generals. Among the prisoners, there are many African soldiers from the French colonial troops. The Wehrmacht's amateur filmmakers film them with a perverse sense of self-satisfaction. Famished, these soldiers kill a goat. German propaganda newsreels insist on showing repeated close-ups of their faces. The official instructions are to portray the degeneration of the French, who are forced to go to war with their slaves from their colonies. The original German commentary is revealing.
Vor wenigen Tagen noch erklärte Chamberlain einem Amerikaner gegenüber, dass England und seine Verbündeten sich als Treuhänder der Zivilisation im Kampfe gegen mittelalterliche Barbarei fühlten. Das sind also die Treuhänder der Kultur.
3,000 African soldiers and officers from the French army will be shot and killed after they're captured. After 7 years of Nazi indoctrination, racism is rampant among the German soldiers. Three dates will now be decisive in determining France's fate. On the 16th of June 1940, Renaud is outmaneuvered by the Council of Ministers in Bordeaux, and he resigns. As his successor, Philippe Pétain is appointed to head the French government. Place de la Bastille. Those who've remained in Paris listen to Marshal Pétain. The war hero at Verdun announces that he is seeking an armistice.
Français, j'ai demandé à nos adversaires de mettre fin aux hostilités. J'ai pris cette décision dure au cœur d'un soldat parce que la situation militaire l'imposait.
The German radio translates this speech, announcing France's capitulation.
Der Führer will den königlich italienischen Ministerpräsidenten Benito Mussolini zu einer Aussprache treffen, in der die Haltung der beiden Staaten überprüft.
Statement in French.
Some French people are able to pick up the BBC.
General de Gaulle.
General de Gaulle has arrived in London. On the 18th of June, he denounces the armistice. A few days later, he records a new speech.
Nous croyons que l'honneur des Français consiste à continuer la guerre aux côtés de leurs alliés.
Hitler receives a telegram of congratulations from Moscow. On June the 22nd, 1940, Hitler arrives in Compiègne, near Paris. The setup he has ordered is designed to humiliate the losers. He has brought the same railway car that was used for the signing of the 1918 armistice that sealed Germany's defeat. His revenge is complete. The French delegation is led by General Hunsiger. An interpreter reads out a diatribe, accusing France of declaring war without any reason. Hitler does not utter a single word. He stands up and leaves. The French delegates have been informed of the terms of the armistice. One of its conditions is that France hand over all the anti-Nazi Germans who have taken refuge in France. Hunsiger tries to negotiate. The Germans refuse. Hunsiger calls the government in Bordeaux. The German secret services tape his conversation with Weygand.
Oui, mon général, c'est Hunsiger. Mais mon général, c'est fait. Oui, mon général. C'est fait. Je vous remercie encore de la façon dont vous l'avez fait. Mon général, oui, enfin, vous me comprenez, vous? Oui, je vous comprends.
Afterwards, Hitler has the railway car taken to Berlin. In the final days of the Reich, he will have the SS blow it up with dynamite. Soon, the major symbols of France's victory in World War I will be mocked. Like here in Verdun, where 500,000 French soldiers were killed, to come to this 20 years later. Hitler jeers as he visits his men who've only just taken the Maginot Line. He is more solemn when he enters Strasbourg and its cathedral. Alsace and Lorraine are German once again, as he promised they would be. The spoils of the French campaign: 2,000 tanks, 5,000 cannon, 300,000 rifles, 4 million rounds of ammunition. At an army supply warehouse, the Wehrmacht finds a stock of long johns meant for the French army, warm woolen garments which will be stored away for future campaigns. The spoils are the factories, the harbours, all the riches of France. It was the French who declared war. As a consequence, they will pay the equivalent of $100 million a day in occupation costs. General Hunsiger goes to Germany for the first meeting of the commission charged with applying the terms of the armistice. To spare troops, Hitler decides to let France retain partial sovereignty, under a government at his beck and call, and with a limited army stripped of heavy weapons, just to maintain order. The country is split in two: an occupied zone in the north and along the entire Atlantic coast, providing access to all the harbours. Italy controls the Mediterranean area and occupies a narrow ribbon along the Alps. The rest is called the Free Zone, with a new capital, Vichy. This spa town has been chosen in part for its many hotels. In early July, Marshal Pétain moves into them, along with the government ministries. The atmosphere everywhere is abysmal. However, this Vichy government continues to control a vast colonial empire, and above all, a still powerful navy. Hitler's only request is that its ships be disarmed and remain in their ports, for he is afraid it might join forces with Britain. Churchill fears the opposite, that it will fall into German hands. He orders the Royal Navy to neutralize it. A British naval force sails to one of France's biggest naval bases, Mers-el-Kébir in Algeria. Churchill is taking no risks. An ultimatum is dispatched: either join us, scuttle your own ships, or sail under escort for demilitarization in the Caribbean. The French reject all proposals. The British open fire. Two French battleships are heavily damaged, and one, the Britannia, is sunk. 1,297 French sailors are killed. Seeking to show his people, the world, and above all the United States, how determined he is, Churchill strikes out at his former ally, whose fleet could have helped the Germans land on British shores. 2 days after the attack, the Vichy government breaks off diplomatic relations with Britain. All of Germany acclaims Hitler. His lightning conquest of France enthralls his generals. He sees himself as the greatest war leader of all time, on a par with Napoleon. And like the Emperor, no one dares to contradict him anymore. The Germans occupy the Channel Islands, Jersey and Guernsey, stepping stones towards the invasion of Great Britain. The British get ready for a German invasion, taking measures that might appear trivial. Another urgent measure is to send the children away to the countryside for safety. Always a painful moment. Their elder sisters, their mothers and grandmothers join the war effort. Every woman must defend her home against the fearsome German paratroopers. The men join up as local defense volunteers for the Home Guard, even veterans of the First World War. The willing and able are mobilized while the army rescued at Dunkirk reforms. America supplies rifles, machine guns, and anti-aircraft cannons, and everyone perfects their skills. Churchill delivers a most inspired speech to the British people.
The battle of Britain is about to begin. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves as if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years. Men will still say, this was their finest hour.
One of Churchill's main weapons is the Royal Air Force, along with its remarkable aircraft, the Spitfire, with its Rolls-Royce engine, one of the best fighter planes in the world. Britain also excels in the field of electronics. The British are the first to use radar for the purpose of defence. In the ops room, radar is used for detecting planes and guiding pilots towards the enemy. The pilots from all over the British Empire are joined by airmen who have managed to flee their countries under German occupation, or whose governments are in exile in London. Poles, Dutch, Czechs, and the first of the Free French Forces, along with de Gaulle. Many of the British pilots are Oxford and Cambridge students. One of them, Richard Hillary, later wrote, "We were known as the long-haired boys. We were disillusioned and spoiled. The press referred to us as the lost generation. Superficially, we were selfish and egocentric. The war demanded no heroics, but gave us the opportunity to prove to ourselves and to the world that, undisciplined though we might be, we were a match for Hitler's dogma-fed youth." These German pilots have been trained by the Hitlerjugend, the Hitler Youth, with the idea of revenge. They feel that they are invincible. Their leader, Goering, is a popular figure in the regime. Goering, who is a man of luxury, often stays at the Hotel Ritz in Paris and turns the Luxembourg Palace into the Luftwaffe's headquarters. He has promised Hitler that the Luftwaffe could obliterate the Royal Air Force in days, take control of the air, and enable the Wehrmacht to invade Great Britain. The Luftwaffe has at its disposal all of France's airfields, their installations, and their equipment. Its pilots are well trained, like Adolphe Galland with his trademark cigar, who fought against the Republicans in Spain. Or Werner Mulders, an ace from the Battle of France. He was one of the pilots shot down, taken prisoner, and then returned to the Germans. He is now part of the aerial offensive against Great Britain. Taking off from these fields in occupied France, the Germans will attack convoys in the Channel, harbours, and airfields in southern England. They will shoot down 500 British aircraft at the cost of 1,000 of their own. The British pilots hold out, giving everything they have. Churchill proclaims, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." Hitler decides to postpone his plans to invade Britain. This is his first setback. His tactics now rely more on nighttime bombings. He says, the British will surrender when their cities have been destroyed. German bombers attack British cities like Coventry and London. This is the Blitz, daily bombings. As for the British people, they hold up admirably. They dig shelters in the gardens of their cottages. And in London, they sleep in the underground stations and go to work the next day. They never lose their confidence or sense of humour. Churchill says to the French,
Ici, dans cette ville de Londres, que Herr Hitler prétend réduire en cendres, nos gens tiennent bon.
Hitler is exasperated. He will later call Churchill a Jew-ridden half-American drunkard. From now on, whenever he is thwarted, he will vent his spite against the Jews. On October the 12th, 1940, on the day of Yom Kippur, the Jews of Warsaw are told that a ghetto would be set up. A wall 3 meters high is erected, enclosing 500,000 Jews, men, women, children, the elderly, who will suffer horrifically from hunger, cold, and poverty. In his chalet in the Bavarian Alps, the Berghof, Hitler is filmed by his mistress Eva Braun as he celebrates New Year, surrounded by the children of Nazi dignitaries. He has another plan up his sleeve, another big gamble. His mission now is to conquer new Lebensraum, living space, to the east. He has allied himself with Stalin, only to better attack him later on. His failure to take Britain compels him to move quickly, before Churchill is able to draw America in. That would set the world ablaze.